In this episode of Toolbox, I'll talk about different frameworks that can help you leverage your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills to build desktop apps. I'll show you a demo of one of the new contenders in this space, Neutralino.js. Can it beat the Electron platform? Stay tuned to find out. The pace of the web is relentless, and that's why you need the Toolbox. Can it beat the Electron platform? Stay tuned to find out. The pace of the web is relentless, and that's why you need the Toolbox. Hello everyone, this is Ray Villalobos, and I stream about front and full stack tools on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Follow me and subscribe on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube for more content. And if you want to watch any past episodes, make sure you take a look at my blog, raybo.org. Looks like I have a little bit of an audio duplication problem, so let me see if I can figure out how to take care of that. Let's see if I have anything open. Yeah, there we go. Looks like I had a copy of YouTube open, so I apologize for that. So I wanted to talk this week about building desktop apps with the things that you already know. You may be aware of the top framework for that, which is Electron. So I have sort of an overview of all the other options that are available. Some of the new ones and what they do are pretty interesting. So I want to cover some of those, and then I'll give you a demo of one of the new kits on the blog, Neutralino.js. And I think that with all these episodes, you sort of should try to figure out if something new is something you want to pursue. I try to give you a demo to kind of show you practically how that leverages into something that you can build. So this demo is going to be a little smaller than the normal, and I'll talk about all the differences between the platforms. So before that, I want to cover a few industry news, and I want to say hi to whoever is on the chat. So let's see, we've got Ali from India. Awesome. Peter, one of the regulars. Hello, Peter. Always good to see you around. There's somebody from Barcelona. I do know how to speak with the Spanish S's. And somebody likes my cool music. Sometimes depending on your privacy settings, people show up as LinkedIn users, and that's why you see that. So Sudansu has messed around with Electron. I asked a question in the chat. Have you ever built a desktop app before? Yeah, I did a course on Electron, and I really like it. Interesting to see what some of these new frameworks are trying to do, and there's quite a difference in between them. So we'll explore some of that. So British Columbia, hello. Also, wow, South Africa, that's great. And let's see, Shelby and you guys and Dawana are both around North Carolina, around Charlotte. So that's awesome. Yes, there is, this thing automatically gets recorded. So if you're watching it, depending on where you're watching it, if you're watching it on LinkedIn, then that URL will appear afterwards. It's a little bit hard to find afterwards. So you can go to the YouTube channel, which is this YouTube/Planet of the Web, and it's usually a little bit easier to find that. Or you can go to the blog, which is raybo.org, which is this blog right here. And you can always find all the previous episodes in the toolbox section. So last time I did something on the new CSS frameworks, and I did a demo of the new Bootstrap 5.2 release. Before that, I talk about Solid.js. So you can find lots of really cool previous episodes on the website as well. So I wanted to, like I said, do some industry news and give a little plug to my favorite conference of the year. GitHub Universe is happening again on November 9th and 10th. used to try to go. It's if you know me, you know that I have a lot of GitHub merch because I really love the company. And so, I can't wait to go because I buy a lot of clothing when I go there. So let's see. And my clothing's getting a little bit old. I haven't been to any conferences. I usually pick up shirts from companies that I love. So it's nice that they're having it. It's a hybrid conference now. So they're having it in real life and also remote. If you happen to go there, look me up. I'll be wearing probably this shirt at least one of the days. I do have 10 of these shirts, so I technically could wear it every day, but I don't know. That seems sort of weird, like showing up. Maybe as long as I weather them differently, you can tell. You probably watch different episodes of the show. You can tell when I'm wearing a shirt that I've worn more often. This one seems pretty new. So anyways, let's see. November 9th. I can't wait for it. It's really well put together. It's usually in San Francisco. And one of the things that GitHub does that is fantastic is like their branding is super clean and amazing, and their conferences are really, really good. So if you have a chance to go, look me up. Now, let's see. There is something interesting going on in the in the web, and that is that a lot of people are getting hired by companies. So if you saw like a couple of episodes ago, I did a demo of Solid.js. And let's see if I can find the article because I thought I have it in here. Let's see, Ryan Coronado. So the creator of Solid.js just got hired by Vercel, just hired full time. So let's see. Looks like I didn't find the actual article. So actually, this is the article where he announces that he's joining Netlify actually full time. And so Ryan Coronado, creator of Solid.js, which really has taken off this year. It's a little bit of an alternative to React, but it's trying to kind of break out on its own. It has some really interesting ideas and tries to make things a lot faster. But one of the things that's happening in the industry is a lot of the creators of open source are getting hired by companies to go work full-time, still work 100% on their open source project. And I'm wondering if that's any good. I don't know what your thoughts are about it. So it looks like for some reason the stream ended all of a sudden. So I don't know what happened. It said that there was an error. Let me just check out the LinkedIn page to make sure that it's still going live. Wow, what a day. Let's see. Says, let me check out LinkedIn really quick and also the YouTube channel to see if it's still broadcasting the event properly. And so give me a second this is happening here. Let's see. Let me just check really quick, people. And I'm also just going to check YouTube to make sure that I'm broadcasting there as well, sort of offline, to make sure that the stream is still happening before I keep going. And let's see, hopefully that will be the case. Yeah, it looks like at least on YouTube it's back on. So hopefully it connected back. For some reason it just stopped recording, it said, or it stopped streaming. I'm not sure what that was. So hopefully we're back. So let me just keep on going on. So I'm wondering, is this kind of a good move to see companies hiring people specifically to work on open source project? I don't know. So it looks like for Peter, it sort of froze again. Let's see. I would probably suggest that you try the YouTube stream. I don't know if it's something with LinkedIn in the industry. So let's see. Well, I guess let me know if you can watch it or not. And I'll just, I don't know why that stuff happens sometimes. I had such high hopes for today's session. So I think it looks like I am streaming again. So let me just refresh the LinkedIn page and see if it's all back. So, well, let me just keep on going. If you're having problems, just go to the YouTube channel. Looks like a LinkedIn user is saying that they can see me fine on LinkedIn. So we'll just keep on going and hopefully things will get sorted out. Had to restart it really quick. So, all right, the Solid.js creator got hired. Also, if you know that I've mentioned before, Rich Harris, who is the creator of Svelte, got hired by Vercel. So there's almost like a competition between these two companies to hire like open source project creators. And I don't know, I feel a little bit weird about it because I feel like at some point maybe the platforms will start having uh, some you know asking people to have some responsibility to the project. All right, so other than that, I love this report that I saw this week called the State of Engineering Report. So I don't know if you've seen this. This is like a sort of survey of engineers, and basically the focus was on how do engineers spend their time. And when I first saw this, I was guessing like pretty much Google copy pasting and Stack Overflow, and I wasn't too far from what it actually was. So let me make this a little bit bigger. And so if you look at the report, basically it says that everybody is using open source code. Look, almost 90% of the engineers view open source code as somewhat essential to their day to day. If you look at some of the questions around usage, that the 80% of developers are actively pulling open source code, especially a little bit higher for junior engineers, which makes a lot of sense because maybe they don't know how to do something and they like some of the projects and they start using those. But as you learn how to do stuff, you probably have, bigger code bases or bigger things that you've done before. So that was pretty interesting. So, 80 to 80, 50% at least once a week and 80% at least once a month. I mean, I can't imagine like a web project that I would create that doesn't use any open source code. I know that I actually try to look for projects that don't have any dependencies because it does get crazy in terms of updating things when you have a ton of dependencies. Stack Overflow memes are true, which is just that people are copying code all the time. So yeah, it also includes copy and internal snippets and also a lot of code that you have written yourself. So true. So it's kind of interesting to see the sort of amount of answering specific sort of ways of answering the questions. So things you wish you would spend less time on writing tests. Yeah, I think everyone. Let's see. Oh, those can save you time, but refactoring code, recruiting was really big for managers. Firefighting, taking care of urgent work. It's really hard. I don't know that a lot of people understand this who are not engineers, that it's just really hard to get into like the zone and be focused. So I think like a lot of people have sort of problems with some of these things. So, I was sort of surprised that people wait a lot on machines. I guess in a bigger company, like when I looked at how GitHub does their code, they were saying something crazy like originally when they created a repo, when you had to like build the repo from scratch, it took like, I don't know if it was at least 15 minutes or maybe it was like up to an hour. They took that down to like 15 seconds, but on some of these huge projects, getting everything built just takes forever. So that was interesting. Wrangling people is harder. Waiting on people, code review requirements, just even getting, a lot of meetings. You spend a lot of time on meetings and just getting a hold of people is even harder. So it takes an entire week for code to make it from a software engineer's brain into production. So that's interesting. I didn't know that. Let's see, some feedback. Developers just want or they appreciate getting some feedback, I guess, on their code. Interesting. Whose code is it anyways? More than 30% of developers say figuring out who exactly owns a piece of code is difficult and the need to acquire context. And that can take a long time as well. So figuring out who wrote this piece of code, which I thought it would be a little bit easier with something like GitHub. So maybe that's what they're talking about, or maybe using some of these open source projects. And then, there's still a lot of hiring going on, especially for software engineers. So, most developers say they would rather spend less time doing the recruiting and interviewing, especially managers, I guess, who are, it's hard to find people, and you spend a lot of time doing that if you're an engineer manager. Now, productivity wise, it said that they feel like you're a little bit less productive if you're just working from home, but and more productive if you're working at the office. So, I think remote work does work and can work, especially for developers. You kind of get a little bit more of a focus on the flow, but I can see that sometimes being able to talk to other people, especially when you have to do non-engineering things and you're not like focused on code, some of those things are better handled, I guess, in a physical place. So yeah, a lot of developers find themselves more productive at the office, at least partially. So I don't know. I've been working remotely for more than 10 years now, so I have no idea, even way before COVID. So I have no idea what it's like to work in an office anymore. I don't know. I feel like I would still like to show up in my sweatpants everywhere. So yeah, and we all have a hard time sort of focusing on our flow. So it was sort of an interesting report, and you should check it out. By the way, if you want to get any of the links for the stuff that I'm talking about, you can go to rabo.org, and on the homepage, I have the article for the event today. So you just click on that, and you can play the video, and that's what my problem was before. But you can get the links to all the stuff that I'm talking about here. So don't worry if you miss something or if you need one of the links. So I wanted to spend some brief time with a question I got from a user, just to give you a little bit of insight of what happens with our jobs. So basically, I get this kind of question all the time. Can you update this course to include 5.2? Now, this is something that just released. So Bootstrap version 5.2 released like a week and a half ago. And let's see, it's a pretty new update. The course that I did for Bootstrap, it's like a 5-hour course. It's a really huge course. It's really tough for us to update an entire course. As you know, like if you came here before, last episode actually did a video on all of the new features in Bootstrap 5.2. So we're trying to find a way of having some of those quicker releases, and you may see some of the things that I'm doing in the toolbox show up on LinkedIn Learning. I sure hope so, because I think it makes a lot of sense for me to be able to create a quick video and release it. It might not be perfect, but it's quick, and I can respond to some of the things that are happening within the industry. So I think I responded this pretty well. I've been exploring how to do things quicker. There's a lot of magic that happens in our platform in terms of it's not just recording, but it's also, there's a lot of editing, there's a lot of writing, thumbnail generation, there's again the editing, but then there's also like QA testing, and so there's a lot of people that touch the courses. So to release like a new course or to redo something old, it just takes a long time. So just wanted to kind of give you an idea of the sort of stuff that we go through. Now, another thing that happened is I just released a new course on Git code challenges that I think you will like. So shameless plug. And after this, I'll do a little break. So this was a pretty interesting course that I did a course a while back on Git and GitHub code challenges. So this is a course that has this really cool intro. So let me see if it has like a video game sort of intro. And it rates like the difficulty of the video, and then it asks you to solve a problem, and then I show you how I solve the problem. So I had this really list of a lot of Git things that I thought were pretty cool. So it was nice to be able to do a course on some of the, I guess, esoteric sort of Git things that you can do. So for example, I did stuff on like cherry picking, doing tags, the reflog command, which is a way to undo hard resets, working with work trees for dealing with like multiple branches, really good course. I mean, at least I think so, right? So you should maybe check it out. Let's see. It says that the oh look, Ronnie's here, so I have something to say about Ronnie later on. So let's see what people are talking about. Let me put it back on justrabo.org for now, and I'll take a look at some of the questions here. So uh, let's see. So can you please give some tips on how to gain consistency, expertise into one particular area of technology, since a lot of technologies are there and it's quite difficult to get expertise on it? I think my number one suggestion would be to kind of work on projects as quickly as you can. The thing about working on a project is that it generates a portfolio item for you to show people or for people to see stuff that you've done. It helps you find sort of solve problems that you wouldn't normally have to solve if you're just learning something conceptually. So I think that's pretty important. And so I think that would be my number one tip. Learn to try to, as quickly as possible, build something, make it small. You know, I like the sort of programs like 100 Days of Code where you're trying to do like a lot of code, but I wish it was like 100 weekdays of code so that you still get the weekend off. I don't like that. You know, people try to do it like every day. It's just too obsessive for me. But I say make sure that you give yourself time off. Try to work on projects. You know, I always have a lot of ongoing projects. Like right now, I'm trying to redo this Rabo.org blog using like Astro and Svelte and Tailwind CSS. And so once I have a project, I learn so much. Also, like I give myself a project or I make myself do my next project in something different. So if I want to learn something like Svelte or React or whatever, then I'll make myself a project. And instead of using the thing that I'm comfortable with, I try to make myself use something that I want to learn and I'm a little bit uncomfortable with. So I call that like the 15% solution. And every project, try to make 15% of that project something new that you want to learn. And that's a great way of pushing yourself because you're going to feel pretty comfortable most of the time when you're working on that. But you're going to introduce some sort of variable that is going to be what challenges you. So that's a great question. So let's see. It looks like it says my live stream on LinkedIn shut off. I would say just watch it on YouTube, youtube.com/planet of the web if it keeps giving you trouble. I'm not sure why that's happening. Hopefully I'll figure it out and after the show and try to see what's happening there. So, all right, let's talk about sort of the main event, and that is building things for the desktop. Now, it used to be that whenever you needed an application for Mac, PC, or Linux, you had to rely on all the proprietary languages. Now, today, chances are that if you worked as a developer for a long time, you've been using software that is made with web technologies. The dominant platform in this space is called Electron, so you can find that at Electron.js. Let me go ahead and switch to my side-by-side view. So if you go to electronjs.org, this is the dominant platform in this space. I did do a course on this a while back. It's an open source project, started at GitHub, which is now owned by Microsoft. And it's used to create a lot of different apps. So if you scroll down, you'll see that things like Visual Studio Code use that. Facebook Messenger, Twitch, Slack, Figma. You probably use some of those applications. And then there are, I think, thousands of apps in this apps section. A lot smaller apps, maybe not thousands, maybe this is like hundreds of apps. And there's a lot of work being done. And because it's Microsoft, it is heavily, I mean, it is an open source project, but it is supported by GitHub and Microsoft. So, you know, when something like Visual Studio Code that so many developers rely on is being done with a tool, then that makes, I think, the open source tool a lot stronger because that size company sort of has a lot of resources to throw at the problem. Now, the huge advantage of something like Electron is that you get to use web technologies. So you can use, in addition to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you have access to something like Node.js and NPM, which gives you an additional access to like thousands of existing Node modules and pre-built, applications that can help your existing applications. So you're not just building something from scratch, you're building on the backs of other developers who've developed thousands of additional modules for Node.js. So that is cool. The other thing that's happening when you're using something like Electron is you're building on top of something called Chromium. So Chromium is an open source browser that lets you handle the typical things that an app would have to worry about. So things like Windows and just loading a page, loading separate pages. Those are all things that Chromium would help you handle. And when you're using Node.js, you also have access to the file system. So the Chromium gives you a basic shell that lets you work with Windows. Node.js gives you the file system, and then it gives you access to a lot of modules. Plus, Node.js is JavaScript. So even while you're accessing the file system, you're still using something like JavaScript. Now, Electron and other projects usually provide hooks into the operating system. So you can take a look at, for example, their API page, and you'll find things in here like how to handle things like the network and logging things. And then dealing with like screen resolution, perhaps, working with the shell. What about the touch bar? If your app needs touch bar support, then those things will be added. There'll be like a hook to that specific sort of thing. Since, normally on the web, I guess, I don't know if you do a lot of touch bar things, but you on a touch bar, you have to worry about multiple fingers like clicking at the same time. So those are hooks that these platforms will give you. And the tray, the menus, for example, is another big thing. Like you don't really have to worry about menus when you're inside a browser. On a regular application, you would have to build them yourself. So there's been over time a lot of contenders to something like Electron, and I'm going to go through most of them and then just show you a demo of Neutralino.js so you can take a look at what that's like. I think that once you look at the demo, you can imagine that if you haven't used Electron before, Neutralino is going to be pretty similar. It's giving you a web view and it's allowing you to create web pages, but there are hooks into other things like menus and, opening up a dialog box, dealing with the tray if you have that available. So let's see. One of the things, this is a good point. So Sudansu says that Electron apps tend to be a lot bigger than the others. That's one of the main changes. But let's go through the ones that I looked at. So the first one, and probably the oldest one, is one called NW.js.io. And this is sort of a little bit older than Electron. It's trying to do something pretty similar, though. So this essentially, think about all the things that I just say. The way of working with applications using web technologies, support for all the features in the browser, complete support for Node.js and third-party modules. So this is pretty much almost like, it feels like Electron is actually a clone of this. This started out as being called Node WebKit, and it's built on basically an older project that I think Electron looked at to create when it got created. Basically, cross-platform support for Node.js. I think the main difference between them and these people and Electron is that their version of the Node.js engine. So although you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference just by looking at the programming, the version that they use of their Node engine is different. So there may be some different commands. The hooks to some of the additional features are going to be different. I would say that I would not start with something like NW.js today, just because it's a bit of an older project. Electron is so dominant that it has the most support. However, one of the advantages of NW is that it does offer legacy support for Windows XP. So it may be that you have to support that. You might be in a government institution or somewhere where they require Windows XP for some reason. So that might be of interest to you. That's the only place that I would maybe use that. Now, another contender that is probably the newest kid on the block is called Tauri. This one, the interesting thing about Tauri is that it uses Rust instead of Node.js, and then it also replaces Chromium with other libraries. So what you get is a smaller web view. Think about what Electron is doing is basically taking a copy of, not a full copy, but a copy of like Google Chrome and shipping it with your application, whether or not you need all that. And then it's also shipping like a copy of Node.js with it. So this is an attempt of making that more efficient and faster and smaller. Electron can create pretty large files, and that's one of the problems that this particular framework tries to address. So you definitely, I think this is probably the most modern solution today. And you are basically allowing different ways of dealing with the backend. The big selling point with Tauri, the other big selling point is that it uses Rust for a lot of the backend. So that is maybe something that you wouldn't be interested in. If you want to work with Tauri, you have to know a little bit about Rust in order to deal with what's happening in the backend. So think of like dealing with the file system or dealing with some of the security features. Some of those are handled with Rust. So it's not like Electron where you're going to be working with Node.js, and JavaScript. You're going to be working here a little bit with Rust. One of the reasons people really use Rust a lot and why it's becoming, a really popular language is because of security. Rust is considered to be more secure by default. And Tauri is specifically isolating some of the things that can be problematic in security with JavaScript and putting them in Rust, which is secure by default. So when you use Tauri, you actually have to turn on features. Like if you want access to the file system, it isn't on by default. It's locked down. So you have to turn those type of things on. Everything is locked down. So you do have to do a little bit more work to get things going. So I feel like if you're starting out, maybe something like Node.js and Electron will be more familiar because it really feels just like JavaScript. If you work with like Node.js, it's exactly that. Whereas with Tauri, you're going to have to learn a little bit of Rust. So Tauri uses a library called Tau for the windowing. So it's going to deal with things like windows in a different way by using another library. And it uses another library called Rye for the web view. So instead of using Chrome, you're going to use another library called Rye for handling, what you normally would get by using Chromium. The reason it's doing that is because it's trying to be, again, more efficient, a smaller sort of build, faster applications, more secure. So that may not be something that you are wanting to do. So I think that, this is a great option. I think that if I was learning something from scratch today, I would definitely look at something like Tauri. I almost want to make a future episode on it, but definitely something to take a look at. And I have some more comments from Sudan. So yeah, I would love to contribute to more open source project. Yeah, I mean, that's great. My suggestion for that is a lot of times in projects, you can look for issues, and a lot of times the issues will sort of list whether or not they want help. So here's a status help wanted. That's a popular way to let people know that this is something that they want help with. And sometimes you'll see that some of these help wanted are beginner friendly. A lot of the work that you can get started with documentation and contributions are just in the documentation. That's a great way of getting started, just learning how to process that help by working on the documentation, suggesting things. I've done things for like Bootstrap, tiny things, but just getting sort of started with learning the process of submitting like a pull request or a suggestion, or even understanding like how issues work, and learning now how to use discussions, which are a new way to communicate. They have like polls and discussions now, and there's a lot that you can do there. The discussions can then be turned into issues. And then, if you don't understand that whole process of working with issues, then the help wanted tags are a great way to search for things. So that's a good point. So let's see. Rust is a pretty cool language. Yeah, I really want to get into it. It definitely feels more low level, but it's so many projects are switching at least part of their work onto Rust. So it's really become a way more important project. So let's see some other questions. Is all the JS library only Tauri, Electron, NW, etc. for fun, or any enterprise company hire you? Yeah, I mean, Electron, if you think about it, Electron is heavily used at Microsoft. I mentioned some of the companies that use them. So you could get hired at Microsoft for working with Electron projects. I think it's a great skill. It's really easy to get started because if you're working with Electron, you're going to be working with Node.js and JavaScript, HTML, CSS. So it's going to be an easy sort of fix. What I like to do when I see something like this, and I think, wow, this would be a great sort of project for my portfolio, then I try to build something with it. And this is a lot of things that you see on the toolbox are just me trying to attempt to build something with it and see what the experience is like. You'll see an example of Neutralino today. And it's just me kind of trying to see, hey, is this ready for people to like play with? What are the advantages? Like, why would somebody want to do this? I'm trying to answer that question in these episodes. Why would somebody want to use this? Is this something that you should really look into, or should you wait a little bit? And I'll talk about Neutralino in a minute. So let's see. Yeah, I think you could totally get hired by working on these things for enterprise companies. There is a lot of benefits to working on, a tool that allows you to create cross-platform apps. If you look at Slack, Slack is a huge, I think it's part of Salesforce now. It's part of a huge company. If you look at Electron, if you look at, the WhatsApp desktop app is done with Electron. So I do think that they are very marketable skills. In addition to that, if you learn Rust, that's super marketable. If you know how to deal with like Node.js and the file system security, like it's not that, there's maybe a ton of jobs looking for specifically. That's definitely a smaller sort of piece of the pie, but it's going to teach you to work with a lot of technologies that are valuable, and showing that you understand all those technologies, I think, is super good. So definitely something to look at. So hello from Sao Paulo. Came from a LinkedIn a moment ago, live stream it, ended without notice. Man, I don't know what's going on with the LinkedIn stream. So they may be having problems. So I apologize. That's why I multi-stream to LinkedIn, also Twitter, like twitter.com/planet of the web, youtube.com/planet of the web. So go to your favorite way to find me. I apologize. And I'll try to do a little bit of research as to what happened in LinkedIn. So let's see. I'm used to Vue and the REST API. Currently attending your nice intro course. Yeah, what's also interesting is that with all these applications, you can also use whatever you're comfortable with. You can use Vue, you can use Svelte, you can use React. So these are usually platforms that will allow you to use any of those tools. And again, understanding like all these different pieces puts everything in context. Like, if you're using something like Vue.js or something like React, a lot of times you're not concerned with working with the file system. Like you really just can't even do that. So that's an additional sort of set of skills that are going to make you more marketable. So let's see. How can Electron.js compare to Visual Studio? So Electron is just really a tool for building applications. Visual Studio, if you mean Visual Studio Code, that is an editor. Visual Studio is also like an editor, so I'm not sure exactly what you're going at, but Visual Studio Code was built on Electron. So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of network traffic. Sudansu said Electron is sort of a GUI building library and Visual Studio is an IDE. It depends. Like I guess they're both IDEs, Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. So yeah, definitely. But cool. Let's keep on going. All right. So let me talk a little bit about the next project or the demo that I'm going to be doing. And this is a platform that is also pretty new called Neutralino.js. This is sort of a combination of Electron and Rust. It's trying to make a version of Electron that is much smaller. So the goal of the project is to help you create sort of a lightweight desktop application, sort of like what Tauri is trying to do, except that it's still trying to use web technologies. Instead of using Rust, it still uses Node.js. But what it does that's interesting is that you still work with Node.js, but it doesn't bundle it with Chromium into your app. So the apps are way smaller. Like if you're working with these different tools, Neutralino is going to create the smallest files. So they have a page with a comparison of the different platforms, and you can take a look at their sort of stats and see that generally Neutralino generates files that are much smaller than anything else. And it's a good sort of document with characteristics of the platform and the support that each of the sort of tools give you. I haven't used Flutter. I don't know if anybody's used Flutter, but I'm interested. I think maybe I'll do another episode soon of like building mobile apps, because I find that also pretty interesting. So if you're trying to create the smallest app possible, this is the way that I might go. Unfortunately, this is a way smaller project, so some things don't feel quite like they're done, and the documentation isn't quite as good. They do have a Discord channel, which is pretty active, but it's just not Electron. So you're going to struggle a little bit through it, more than you would with Electron. One of the things that you don't have access to, for example, is menus with Neutralino, and that's a little bit of a bummer because, especially on a Mac. So generally on a Windows machine, you can create a tray menu item pretty easily, but on a Mac, you can't even do that, and you can't customize the menus. It's a little bit of a bummer. Deploying is a little bit harder. So this is definitely a library that you should sort of take a look at and maybe evaluate. I think I want to come back to it at a later date to see if they sort of resolve some of the problems. So let's just go to the demo and we'll take a look at how it works. Let's take a look at how Neutralino gets installed, and I think I'm going to discuss a little bit more about the setup that I normally do. So to get things going, we need to install the CLI. So we'll do an npm install -g, and then we'll do the project Neutralino.js /neu. Now this will allow you to run some terminal commands to work with the application. If you don't like installing global commands, you can try to run the app locally using npx. Honestly, it's a little bit easier to use the CLI, so I would just install it. Now to create a project, let's go ahead and switch to the desktop here. I'm going to use the new command and then the create option, and then I'm going to call this thing demo Neutralino.js. So this is actually going to download a template. You're essentially cloning the template and then creating a project based on that. So I can do a cd demo Neutralino.js. And now that I'm in that project, I'm going to go ahead and just open this up in Visual Studio Code. This template has quite a lot of interesting things in it. And so there's a Neutralino config.json file. It has quite a few extra things in here that you don't actually need. So I'm going to go over the in part. You can take a look at the configuration file on the website if you want a fuller understanding of what everything does. You definitely have to have the application ID. That's an internal name that Neutralino uses. The default mode lets you set up your app as either a window app, a browser app, which means that it runs in a window on your browser, or a cloud app, which means that the app will run on a cloud server instead of your local machine. The browser might be useful if you're debugging things, but I'll just stick with the window version for what we need. Another vital part here is the document root. That's where your application code will reside on the project folder. Notice that we do have a resources folder here. And this is where all of our HTML stuff is, like the index file, JavaScript, and other stuff. You'll be doing most of your work in here. Another important setting is this URL. Assume that your project is like a website, and this is the URL that is going to look for the application. Now it's set to a / here, but you could put the URL to a website, a subdomain, or a subfolder if you need it there for some reason. Another important section is this modes section, which lets you further configure how each of the modes work. So for example, if you're using window mode, you can change the default title of the window and the size of that startup window, also whether or not it has a minimum and maximum height. So you can make the window smaller than these parameters right here. Also, if it opens up as a full screen window, and whether or not it has a border, etc., etc. Now notice that there is some setup here for the browser version and the cloud version, but we're not using that, so you don't really need these parts. Now, there's actually a more concise configuration with minimal settings that you can find right here on a separate project. So these are pretty much bare minimums. Notice that in here, it's actually placing things on the www folder. This Neutralino 0 template is a little bit older, but it is more of a bare bones project. You can also take a look at this page in the documentation, and it goes through every one of the options in the config file. When you create an application, the project will generate files for each platform, and it'll place them right here in this bin folder. To create the application, use the new build command, and that's what places the files in this folder. The rest of the files are mainly default project files like the README, as well as the gitignore, and then there's a GitHub folder with a funding file. Let's go back into the resources folder. Now this might be called www or whatever else is on the document root variable. There's a folder here for the icons that your project will be using. You can change those if you want. Neutralino will automatically load this index.html file. It's a pretty standard HTML document, and it can load a CSS file as well as some scripts at the bottom. Now, this Neutralino.js file is something that you really shouldn't be touching. It's in the JS folder here, and it's the entry point for the application. Now, it's also calling a main.js file with some code for the app. Here you can find a couple of functions that are also in the index.html document whenever we click on one of the links. Let's go ahead and pull up a terminal to run this. I'll do a new run command. This will start up the application window. It's basically a window with our HTML. Now, the other thing you see is some application information right here. Let's go through main.js to see how this is being done. Now, there's a bunch of functions here. You may notice the open tutorial as well as the open docs function. And what it's doing is using Neutralino to tell the operating system to open up a URL with whatever the default browser in your computer is. Let's take a look towards the bottom of the screen past the functions so that we can see how the application is run. First is a command that initializes the library. Now here, we're capturing some events with the events method. The first one is tracking what happens when somebody clicks on a menu in the tray. More of that in a minute. The second one is what happens when somebody closes the window. You can see that function right here. You could add some additional cleanup code here before the app closes if you want to. Now, this other function called onTray menu item clicked is right up here. This sets up what happens when somebody clicks on an item on the tray. Now for us Mac people, the tray would normally be the dock or appear as maybe menu items. But what we're calling it, we're asking Neutralino to exclude the Darwin operating system, which is the Mac operating system. Neutralino doesn't support any sort of menus on Mac OS, and that's quite a bit of a bummer. Now, if you're a PC user, you can see that the setTray method sets up the tray, and that function is right here. It's actually pretty easy to use. You just create a variable for the tray, and then you create the tray with that variable. And you establish an ID as well as the text that appears on the tray. Now, the tray is only available in window mode as well, so it's not going to work for a browser type application. So we're not going to really need these, and honestly, I'm disappointed that you can't do them on a Mac anyways. Now, this show info method is what populates what is in this section right here, this info section. So this is looking for that ID of info, and then it is using some variables. And this is using some constants that Neutralino exposes for you. You can find these global variables right here in the documentation. Now, if you remember in the Neutralino config.json file, you also create your own global variables that are exposed there as well. All right, so let's try installing something. We'll use the Bootstrap framework and download the regular files here. We'll decompress these. I'll make a CSS folder, and I'll bring in the Bootstrap minified version here, and then I'll put the minified bundle in the JavaScript folder. Let's go ahead and get rid of the CSS file, and instead we'll make a link to our Bootstrap document. In the same way, I'm going to load up Bootstrap down here. Let's go ahead and add some Bootstrap classes here. I'll go ahead and rerun the application. And now you can see the text is all centered. We can see the Bootstrap font, and this should also be responsive. All right, so let's go ahead and do something with this thing. I'm going to go into my index.html document, and I'm just going to create a third link here. This link is going to go to an about window, and I'm going to run a function called open about here. So that will need to get programmed into my main.js file. What I'll do is right here, I'll create that function. All right, so for this, I want to do a Neutralino. I'm going to tell the operating system this time to show a message box. So this is like a dialog box. And the nice thing is that it will be local to your operating system. Here we can pass along some parameters. So I'll say welcome. I can also pass some content. I'll also pass along an OK option here. So let's go ahead and put these on separate lines. We can see what's going on a little bit better. And I'll switch them to single quotes here. Let's go ahead and run this application again and just go ahead and run it. Here's my little button. I'm going to click on it, and you can see that the dialog box came up, and you can see that it's a native Mac dialog box with an OK button here that I can close. You could see the OS options and the documentation right here. This allows you to run a number of different operating system commands. If you don't want to use the operating system's dialog box, you can also create your own. Now to do that, I'm going to go into this index.html, and I'm going to add a dot here just so that this looks just like the other one. And what I'll do is make a copy of this file. I'm going to call it about.html. This is going to be a pretty simple HTML page, and it's not going to load the Neutralino files. So I'll just get rid of these right here. It's just going to have a paragraph, and we'll put in a different headline with some additional classes to make it look different. My body is going to have a BG warning class to make it yellow. Now on the main.js file, I can use the window method to create my own dialog box, but it's going to call the about.html document and then pass along a window setup parameter. So we will turn on enable inspector here, just like we would be able to do in a Chrome window, so that we can debug this page if we want to. We'll set up the width and a height. We'll say that it's not maximizable, and we'll make sure that it stops any processes if somebody closes this window. We'll also need to give it an identifier. So I'm going to call this one window ID about. All right, let's go ahead and see if this works. We'll click on this, and you see the About Us window. So you can see that it's a pretty simple project. I didn't dig too much into it. I really ran into some problems getting into the operating system. But basically, if you want to look at that demo, you can take a look at this Planet of the Web. GitHub.com/Planet of the Web. And it's called Demo Neutralino.js. It'll be in the article if you need it. I didn't really enjoy working with the platform because the documentation was really sort of small, and I felt like it needed more details. And basically what you end up doing with this is going through and, using generally HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But then in addition to that, you end up using, the CLI or the different application, the methods that you have in the application to do certain things. So you start configuring with this config file, and then you end up doing things with the API. So you look for the specific thing that you want to do. If you want to work with the clipboard, you do that here. There's a bunch of events that you can target, when you want to do certain things. It's really straightforward, very simple. I want to come back to this maybe a year from now and see if they've improved on some of the things. When you work with something like Electron, it's so easy to create your menus. The fact that this doesn't have that yet is really disappointing, but it's so simple, and it creates files that are so much smaller. than what something like Electron does, that I think it might be a really worthwhile project. It feels as simple to get started as Electron. It's just that it's not as capable or not as, I don't know, well made quite yet. So I'm looking forward to it. Hope you enjoyed that demo. I'm going to see if there's any more questions in the chat that I can answer. Looks like I'm all caught up right now. I think that cool. So if anybody has any questions, yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it that you say that my explanations are good. Also, that little segment was recorded. So I want to try to explore the application a little bit more. So what I'll probably end up doing is, release like a separate demo in my YouTube channel that goes a little bit further. One of the things that I had a problem doing is dealing with the file system. So I was trying to just fetch a file, and I was having a hard time figuring out how to do that. The instructions seem pretty straightforward, but I ran into some problems getting it done with the async system for some reason. It just wasn't doing what I wanted to do, but I'm gonna dig into it a little bit more, and when I release the demo, I'll try to do a little bit, I don't know, fuller demo of accessing files. I know that you can also access like APIs on the web if you turn that on. So I feel like I should build a slightly more complete project when I release the demo separately. But that really gives you an idea. It's just really pretty simple. Config file, then you use web technologies. You have access to all kinds of events through the native API, super tiny releases. One of the other disappointing things was when I actually build the application and you go to double click on it on a Mac, at least, it actually opens up the terminal and then it opens up the application. You have to go through a little bit of extra setup to like create an installer or bundle the app. That kind of stuff seems a little bit simpler in other platforms. I know somebody mentioned Flutter, so that looks really interesting. I thought that it was just something like React Native, that it's kind of more mobile focused. I'm always interested in apps that try to do mobile and desktop because I really feel like they're different things. So I don't know that you would create one app that runs everywhere, even on mobile and desktop. I almost think that that's kind of impossible. So I'm maybe looking forward to looking into Flutter. So thank you for suggesting that. If you have any other suggestions, let me know. I love sort of digging into some of these new frameworks. Now, coming soon, I'm adding some interviews that I've had with people. So far, I've interviewed a couple of super amazing authors. You might know Ronnie Scher. He's the developer that focuses on Python and JavaScript. So we had a great conversation about, if you're a web developer, should you learn Python? And his thoughts on, he also does some stuff with GitHub products. So we had some great conversations with him about that. And I need to edit those and I'll release them at some point later. So just keep on checking the either rabo.org or my YouTube channel, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And then I also talked to Christina Trong, who actually does one of our big, huge courses, CSS Essential Training. And we talked about her career, some of the features in CSS that she's excited about. And I asked her about when's the right time to use something like Flexbox versus Grid, and lots of other great topics. I'm really enjoying doing some of these sort of more interactive Q&As with other developers to get, I don't know, insights into where people come from. I like to ask them questions about education, what was their path, and how to manage your career as well. That's a big interest to me. So yeah, Ronnie's actually in the house. So so Ronnie, that was such a fun interview. So hopefully we'll have that pretty soon. So let's see, JavaScript versus TypeScript future proof. I'm not sure what the question is specifically. So I think that developers today do need to know TypeScript more and more. When you look at the surveys of what people are using, it's becoming, more and more prevalent in the industry. So I think that you should know it. It's actually not that hard to transition. You can actually turn on TypeScript and almost pretty much just write JavaScript, but then adding the additional sort of TypeScript language features is going to give you some benefits. I think most people say that it's a little bit weird getting into it, but then once you understand it, it actually helps you write code that is safer, and it prevents you from some of the sort of dumb craziness of JavaScript, where things just can be anything. I mean, I think JavaScript is great if you understand what it's doing. A lot of times you don't really know why it's doing things, but if you understand what it's doing, then you're pretty good. But TypeScript's definitely something that you should probably learn coming up in the future. All right, so my pleasure talking to you guys. Hopefully I'll see you soon. I apologize for the problems with the network outside of my control. So I will talk to you all soon. Take care.